Hey everyone, I'm Charlie Shrem, and you're listening to Untold Stories. I just had Adam Healy on the show today. Adam was the former chief security officer at Bakkt, that's owned by ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange, and also now he's the chief security officer at BlockFi. What was really cool was that Adam worked for the government for a very long time in super secret positions that he was alluding to, but wasn't allowed to say specifically. Intelligence community related things. So we really got into what the intelligence community thinks of Bitcoin and crypto, how to protect yourself. We talked about how we can attract government employees to actually come into crypto. What is security hygiene and what does that look like? And healthy skepticism. Is it good or is it not good? I feel like I'm like trying to sell people. Anyways, I'm Charlie Shrem. You guys know who I am. You're going to love the show. I'll talk to you right in a minute. All right, everyone. I'm Charlie Shrem. You know who I am. You're listening to Untold Stories. I'm here with Adam Healy. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Charlie. Been looking forward to this.
You just got back from multiple days of being out in the forest and out in nature and shooting guns and working with different law enforcement.
Yeah, something like that. So a guy I know runs a tactical training academy and trains lots of folks, civilians that want to learn more about personal defense, police officers, SWAT teams, special forces operators, and kind of everything in between. And just spent 4 days out there doing a bunch of shooting and moving and communicating, as we like to say. It was quite a blast, no pun intended.
That sounds amazing. That's actually awesome. No, that sounds amazing though. And I'm a little jealous because I haven't been able to go shooting in many years. And it's one of the things that eventually I'll be able to do again. But I actually found out that I'm allowed to own a gun apparently that's in Florida that's considered an antique gun, which is any gun made before 1918 or a replica thereof. So that means like I can get like a revolver that's a replica of like an 1800 revolver or whatever, like a Remington or something. And it could only be cap and ball loaded. Now, I don't even know what that means, but apparently if someone breaks into my house and I have a musket, I got to sit with a little pouch and a fucking stick and loading it up and shit. Because that's what the government allows me to do.
Probably not ideal, but there's a lot of good firearms from back then that could probably be very effective. A blunderbuss would probably be my option if I were you. But you know what they say, whoever they is, they say, God created man, but Sam Colt made them equal.
Oh, I love that. That's actually a great statement. And it's kind of cool that we're talking about physical security because your career is in digital security. Everything you do is, and we can now announce it, this show will come out after the fact. So congratulations. You're the chief security officer at BlockFi, actually one of my favorite companies.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been it's great to be here. Left back kind of early March and been searching around for kind of what my next move is. And after talking to Zach a lot, who's great, by the way.
I'll text Zach now and tell him he doesn't need to be on the show anymore. I'll just I'll tell him Adam's taking care of it. No, I'm just joking.
But so had a lot of conversations with Zach and Flory and kind of the broader team, and a lot of things made sense. And starting there just on Monday. Oh
wow. You've been working in informational security for a very long time. You started your career, you're a Marine. And so thank you for that. And then you did a lot of informational security for the government. And more out of curiosity, I'd like to hear some cool stories about that. But before you do that, do you remember I know it's a stupid question, like when you first heard about Bitcoin, but I guess because you were in a very unique position. So I'm kind of curious to hear what were your first takes about it? Because you were kind of working in digital security already. So maybe you're a little bit jaded at first about a cryptocurrency,
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a story I haven't told to many people. And I don't think I'm crossing any lines if I do tell it, but maybe I'll get a phone call from the FBI or something if I do. Joking, of course, but I've been probably back to 2006, 2007. Got out of the Marine Corps, was working for a defense company, a private company that does defense contracting work outside DC, and just kind of realized that no one was really taking what I considered this existential threat very seriously. And really started focusing my career around kind of that 06, 07, 08 timeframe on security. Fast forward a few years, and I'm working in we'll say at this point, I've transitioned from being a contractor to what they consider a GS, federal employee, civil servant.
Yeah, what's his name was explaining to me the difference. I had someone on the show and he was explaining to me the difference of when Brian Hoffman, who used to work at Booz Allen, now he runs Open Bazaar. Yep. He was explaining to the difference of like how federal employees actually work. It's interesting.
Yeah. So I had just actually come back from Afghanistan, and we'll probably get into some of those stories, but I've just spent about 10 months overseas, about 8 of those months in Afghanistan. And that kind of rounded out my, about 3 years in the Middle East throughout my government career. And was back in DC, was at some, we'll just say undisclosed government building, 20, 30 minutes outside DC, working in what's considered a SCIF, which I'm not sure if you've heard that term, but
I've never heard of that term before.
Okay. So sensitive compartmented information facility. It's essentially where specially designed facilities, and there's actually a lot of intersecting points to where how a SCIF is designed and how you want to design facilities to manage cold storage. So was working in one of those, running a fairly large technology team for a joint government agency initiative. And just randomly, I get a slide deck, somebody emails me, and it was a lot of talk about cryptocurrencies and this thing, Bitcoin and Tor, which we obviously knew a lot about Tor within the government. And it was really funny because it piqued my interest in the sense of once you've seen behind the curtain, you get very, I would say, cautious about what big government can do. I know a lot of friends, I have a lot of friends and a lot of folks that come from similar backgrounds, military, intelligence, special operations. And those are the first folks that generally go out and buy the 100-acre farm.
Yes.
So I get this slide deck, and it wasn't so much of what we talk a lot about now. How do we add utility? How do we monetize? How do we make this more generally acceptable? The theme of the deck was more, how do we break this? And of course that didn't really go anywhere. And, we can talk a lot about various conspiracy theories, none of which I really subscribe to, but that was about 2012 timeframe. And 2011, 2012, and kind of passively was interested in it and carried that through till about, fast forward a handful of years, about 2017, 2016, when things were really starting to ramp up. And I just kind of reinvigorated my interest.
You mentioned something earlier. You mentioned 2007, 2008, the crisis, but I don't know if this was like a Freudian slip, but what was interesting is that you focused on the digital crisis when the rest of the world was focusing on the financial crisis. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I was in a very privileged position at that point, right? I was working for, I was in the government orbit. And, if you look at places that are immune from certain types of crises, Washington, D.C. and the surrounding government, military, industrial complex was fairly immune from the recession.
Florida,
right?
too.
Yeah, exactly. Like I didn't worry about my job. I was getting a paycheck. Everyone I knew was in the same boat. Yeah, our houses dropped in value.
Oh, so, I see where you're going with this.
But we had no concern about those things. So, government checks generally don't bounce, which is a good thing. Hopefully still true today, maybe.
Yeah.
I was really starting to see, we were actually deploying some new infrastructure for a particular agency. And the kind of mandate was just get it up and running, deploy it to the network. And I'm sitting there taking a step back, and this was fairly new technology at the time. And that was really a moment of inflection for me. I said, no one's thinking about security. No one's thinking about how we harden these devices. And the initiatives that we do have within the government for security are very antiquated and very bureaucratic. And that was really kind of where I hard pivoted from systems engineering more or less into security engineering.
You mentioned Tor as well. So kind of like in the circles that I grew up in, we always knew that Tor was created by the Navy. And so we always it was like a tongue in cheek that Tor is now being used for everything. What was like from the inside? Was that something that was cool? Did you guys know that was the attitude, is like, here's something that the government created that now is used to basically have this privacy and anonymity in a lot of respects?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people, and I think it would shock the general public to really have discussions with people that were kind of in that world. And when I say that world, I mean kind of the military, defense, intelligence world.
Yeah.
Those that take things like privacy incredibly seriously. Those that really have what I would consider more libertarian skewed views on privacy and civil liberties.
So you're telling me that people that are going back to the farm analogy, this is we're not even 10 minutes into the show yet and we're getting into the rabbit hole. You're telling me that people like the ones who are the defense contractors who work for the government all these years basically are all the farmers around the DC area. Like all the farms in Virginia are owned by probably like former government employees because they see, I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but then you said that these guys are more privacy conscious, and like, I get it. It's like almost a Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. So now they realize that responsibility. Is there like a burnout? Is there a burnout with when, you know, you're working in the government and there's like data and there's like, it's such a balance that you have to maintain, right? Is that like, because one, you're a human, and the other side, you understand the need to have, you know, efficient data when you work for the government, because it does at the end of the day, you know, you have things like, you have real crime, you have real terrorism, you have, you know, child pornography and things like that. So there is a real use for some of these things, but how do you like maintain that balance?
Yeah, I mean, so let's unpack that a little bit. So I would first say the farms around Virginia, probably not mostly government folks. I'm actually speaking to you from a very nice farmhouse just outside Charlottesville.
Oh, I'm jealous.
That I'm staying in for the next little bit as I make my way back to the to the East Coast. But so I wouldn't say maybe not those farms, but I know a lot of folks that have, you know, really been in that world, because you also have to keep in mind, whether you're a contractor, a government employee, and certainly not the military, none of those jobs pay very well. So, you know, you're not buying some of those beautiful farmhouses, you know, but you are buying. And I know a lot of people that are in that boat where they want a little bit of privacy. They want a little bit of distance. They want to get their families outside of the major metro areas. And I think that that continues. Yeah. I mean, I'm, you know, I spend a lot of time in a couple different cities, and I'm seriously evaluating kind of like whether it's, you know, COVID, which, you know, we can talk about that, protests, always great to see people protesting, looters, never good to see looting. You know, depending upon kind of how you do that calculus, I'm seriously kind of starting to evaluate, you know, where are the places that I want to spend more of my time geographically, especially as remote work is becoming more popular. But kind of back to the question, you know, I think there is certainly a dichotomy. There is certainly a, you know, at one point in my career, I'm sitting there looking at, you know, incredibly classified intelligence on cyber threat activity around the world that is being that is being obtained with various sources and methods. But the other side of that is I take my personal privacy very seriously, and I advocate for citizens to do the same.
If you didn't work in that role, if you didn't have that job, if your life went a different way, would you be as privacy conscious, do you think?
You know, I don't know. I think it's really easy to like fall into the mainstream kind of groupthink of, well, they're listening to everything, so why would I care? I'm not doing anything wrong. I think it's really easy to kind of just as humans kind of fall into that groupthink. So it's hard to say. You know, I grew up of all places, you know, and we met for the first time in Miami.
It's kind of a fair statement to make, because I say that too. Like, I'm guilty of that. And as much as a privacy conscious person I am, a narco-capitalist and whatever label you want to put on me, I almost assume, because my background, and I'm like, I always joke with my wife, I'm like, let's just assume whoever they is listening all the time about everything we say. And it's like, we laugh, ha ha ha. But like, is it that wrong? Yeah, we have Alexa in all the rooms, you know, Google Homes. We all, you know, we have toaster oven can mine for Bitcoin. Actually, it didn't actually pan through. I was so excited. When I went into jail, I was waiting for 21 to launch their Bitcoin toaster. And when I got out, that was the first thing I asked, and it never actually appeared.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is a fair question. You know, we're all products of our experiences, and it's hard to say kind of where you'd land on the privacy spectrum. Ultimately, I look at it much like I look at software. And software risk is bad things happen to good people all the time, every day, whether here in the U.S. and especially abroad. And, you know, I've been to, it's funny, I saw a list the other day and it was like 10 most dangerous countries. And I was like, I think I've been to 3 of them and one that was like in the top 20.
Oh my God.
And so yeah, bad things happen. But if there's just a standard amount of risk, and then you are involved in certain industries, cryptocurrencies, you're a public persona, you do podcasts, whatever it is. Each one of those things, my view is, increments your risk up slightly. And then you kind of have to look more broadly about kind of what are the threats given your risk? What are the threats that might come after you?
Oh, it's an interesting point. You mentioned, and I want to get back to that, but you mentioned custody. Actually, I'll talk about custody after. How does someone know what risk level they're at? So now you've piqued my interest. Is there a scoring system?
There isn't, but maybe we should create one. Maybe that's the next meeting in Miami.
Well, the running joke is if you call your grandma and you start saying bomb, 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 like that, like, is there a trigger word somewhere that's going to, what movie was that? The Good Wife, the TV show, they kind of show how they're listening and there's this like multiple hops and there's just someone in an office in a cubicle somewhere. Movies and TV exaggerate things. Always, of course. But I think at the end of the day, what has come out of at least Bitcoin and crypto over the past 10 years is that not just financial literacy, but also like, what do we call it? Privacy literacy or freedom literacy? Or
I call it, a term which is just coincidental given where we are with the kind of a global pandemic. I call it security hygiene, and something I'm often quoted as saying.
I'm writing that down.
Because security hygiene is broad, right? It could be your cyber presence, your privacy. When you get out of a car at a grocery store at 10 p.m. to go run and get, frozen pizzas or diapers or whatever it is you're getting. But I look at it like you can take, what I'm often quoted as saying is, you can take all the antibiotics in the world that you want, but if you don't wash your hands, you're still going to get sick.
That's actually perfect.
So it's what's your hygiene and kind of what's that security hygiene? I think that's just a good way of like very simply boil it down.
I've never been more security hygienic than I am now, but I'm pretty confident. Like, here we go. I got this Bitcoin ring. I think it's the only one because my dad is a jeweler, so he made it for me back in like 2012 or whatever. I just wanted one. Bitcoin ring. Here we go, everyone. All my listeners, private key. There you go. There's a Bitcoin on there. Now that if whoever screenshotted this private key, this is a bearer instrument now. Like if I give this ring to someone, that's $10,000 or whatever it is. But the thing is with this private key, it's double encrypted with BIP38. And I don't even remember the password. So please don't come after me. People used to call me Four Finger Charlie. But let's talk about custody for a second, because you said something cool too. You were building out these like government, what was the word you called them? I didn't write it down.
A SCIF, SCIF.
Okay, so you're building out these government SCIFs, and then you kind of modeled backed custody, or you modeled custody kind of after this.
Well, so I think something that the custody component of crypto certainly lacks, and potentially more broadly, or maybe certainly more broadly, the larger industry lacks, is how do we effectively instrument security? And, a lot of firms, and they're not wrong, and I'm friends with most of their CSOs, and in some cases, most of their CEOs, they go off and they get SOC 2 certifications. They go and they do an ISO certification. They do CCSS audits. They do all these things, all great, all net positive, all allows the industry to show a certain level of maturity. But my view is one of the things that we lack is what is the ISO 27000 or SOC audit equivalent that is unique to custody? That doesn't exist. It just simply doesn't exist.
So there's no standard for custody.
Well, there's no way to in a standardized way instrument and watch metrics trend over time. Call it a security hygiene score. And I think a lot of that just gets back to it's a very nascent industry. Still to this day, I was on stage not too many months ago with Perianne, and she had asked a question. I said, "Yeah, I think we're still like in year 0, maybe year 1, across the industry, and certainly more in the security context as well."
How are people custodializing crypto? I mean, like, you don't have to give specifics, but most people who listen to the show don't really understand like what that looks like. What a family office comes and says, "Hey, we'd like to allocate $1 million, of our assets into Bitcoin. But then that's a family office, so there may be a little more risk, But then you have like a pension fund, a teachers union pension fund. They need, like you talk about security standards, those guys need the best security level. Like it's a teachers union. They teach our kids.
Yeah. We want the teachers to be taken care of.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know why we don't take care of our teachers in this country. That's the one thing I still don't understand.
I saw something on Twitter the other day, and it was like day 4 of homeschooling, and now every parent thinks teachers should make $1 million a year. They should. They should, but also like we can talk about education, but I think education should be a little bit more decentralized. But it's not bad compared to other countries. I was reading some other countries' curriculums, and even some like Western countries. You'd be so surprised about like what they throw in there to teach their kids. No, I forgot what I was talking about. I forgot my train of thought. It happens. Custody. Yeah. So everyone knows what custody, like a Trezor or, my phone, a BitPay, wallet or whatever. But how are these like larger institutions, like the teachers union, how are they custodializing? What is physically how do you physically, do they show up like at a warehouse with like a thumb drive and then there's like a hand holding, shaking hand process? Like what does that entail? Yeah. I mean, so I'll caveat this and say every institution's different. And my thoughts on this, and I certainly have helped a lot of friends move assets around that are more on considered the retail or maybe high net worth side. But when you start to get into family offices or any type of institution, you have to have much more sophistication around how you do it. And a lot of it really does come down to a few different ways that custody can be provided. And if you're a pension fund and you're looking for exposure to crypto or Bitcoin, what have you, your best bet is to leverage the infrastructure, the plumbing that's already been put in place over the last number of years. There are, everyone will argue about this, but in my mind, it's pretty cut and dry. There are kind of top tier brands for custody. Leverage one of them. Diversify across 2 or 3 of them, but leverage kind of that ecosystem. And I'm sure somebody will say, no, not your keys, not your crypto. And I get that. I personally understand that. But when you're talking about institutions, heavily regulated institutions that have that have stakeholders that are potentially thousands or tens of thousands of teachers. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the industry has been shifting, and there's a constant innovation, but I think largely it's still bucketed as hot or cold, HSMs or not, some version of Shamir or not. And then kind of the newest piece and something that I'm very passionate about and very interested in seeing how it matures is MPC. And that's kind of the new hotness. What's MPC? Multi-party computation. What is? So those are kind of the fire blocks of the world. Well, so kind of. So MPC effectively allows you to use math, something called zero knowledge proofs, to digitally sign. And it sounds like black magic, but I trust you. Trust me, it's not. The math kind of that backs this has been around since the 70s, and there's a number of very top tier companies, Fireblocks being one, that are doing great work on this, and it effectively allows you to through rounds of cryptographic operations, digitally sign a transaction without ever fully rendering the private key in any single insecure location. So even if you think of Shamir, no, I'm thinking it through. It's actually brilliant, but how does it work? Because the old OTC deals back in like 2011, the way they would be done was actually what someone would do was he would actually not send a transaction, but they would send a pre-signed text. So what would happen is I'd get, like if you did an OTC deal back in the day and you bought Bitcoin from someone who was like an early miner, they wouldn't actually just send the transaction to you. They would take the private key. They would do everything for the transaction except for broadcasting the transaction. And they would send you the raw pre-transaction data that you can then go and broadcast it on your own. Yeah. Interesting. Kind of pointless. So yeah. MPC very quickly gets to some PhD level math that I'm certainly not qualified to like speak at a deep level. But you guys should have Michael from Fireblocks on. He can explain it with his view of the world. But effectively, the easiest way to explain it is if you have 3 parties none of them want to disclose how much they make, but you need to derive the average salary among those three. You could do that using MPC-like technology or a mechanism that allows you to do that by introducing certain randomness by each party. So that's where a lot of, I think, investments happening right now across some of the larger custodians. But again, it's one of those things that is still pretty new, and there's still some hesitation about fully adopting it. And I really think, still to this day, and I'm friends with a lot of the MPC organizations out there, Curve, Fireblocks, Unbound, and others. And what it really does get down to, though, from my view, is nothing beats sharded keys in a cold storage vault with a lot of technical and physical security wrapped around it for the vast majority of assets under custody.
It's almost a mixture of both, and it is a mixture of both. Are they working on custody? There's no question that crypto and gaming have gone hand in hand since the early days of Bitcoin when it first launched, and in fact, that's what really drove mass adoption. Companies like BitCasino, which is the first ever licensed Bitcoin casino, and brands like sportsbet.io. I mean, it's the reason people are using crypto and Bitcoin today. Fun, fast, and fair. When you're using blockchain-based gaming, make sure you require that they are fair, because there's no reason that they shouldn't be transparent, because everything can be seen on the blockchain. Coingaming is so cool. It's an ecosystem of brands, products, and people that are serious not just about shaking up the gaming industry, but also the crypto industry. These guys have been around since the early days of Bitcoin. The CEO of Coingaming used to actually mine for Bitcoin and use the Bitcoin miner to heat his home in Estonia. I mean, those go down to like negative 25 degrees. So if you're cool about driving crypto awareness together, if you got a question or you just want to connect with your team of like dreamers and doers, the whole community, make sure you check them out. Coingaming.io, play some of their games, sportsbet.io, or BitCasino. Fun, fast, and fair. I'm Charlie Shrem. I'll talk to you guys right in a minute. Like broadly across all blockchains, or is this just Bitcoin? Because I almost wonder, because of Bitcoin's security level and length of time it's been around, and its immutability, and the fact that it's, I guess, unlike some of the other coins and tokens that can be easily like controlled by some other like third parties or whatever, that people are okay with building out these like crazy custodial solutions on Bitcoin.
Yeah. So MPC is effectively coin agnostic. So it can be leveraged against various different assets. So certainly that applies there. And I think also something like Shamir, right? Another common technology that's found in custody solutions is kind of an M of N sharding of keys, Shamir, that can be used across any key material, regardless of the crypto asset. I say any, somebody will jump on and comment, oh, like he's not 100% correct, but generally any. Yeah, generally any.
It's so interesting how that works out. So now you took your role. I know we're jumping around on the timeline here, and I was trying to follow. So no, it's awesome. So when did you like jump in full time? And this is a question. This is a question that I've only been able to ask like one other person or two other people, because I've had two other guests who've were working for the government in various roles, and then jumped right into like Bitcoin or crypto or whatever. What the hell were you thinking? Doing that? That's the question.
It's really funny. I have like a
crazy jump.
Well, so I leave government, right? And I go to work at a firm out of their New York office, but a firm based in Palo Alto out in the Valley. So I'm just under 3 years there. And a lot of data analytics, a lot of big data, a lot of insight generation for large Fortune 500s. They also had government contracts, but so I did that. So I was kind of legging into the private sector overall, not just crypto. So spent just under 3 years there, and decided that I'm going to leave there. And oddly enough, right, I go from government to kind of this private sector big data firm, and then go into healthcare. Kind of very randomly end up in healthcare, and not a great place to be. Like healthcare is not an ideal place to work if you're in technology. There's just a lot of problems to be solved and not a lot of budget to do it, which ultimately means kind of semi-mediocre solutions across the board.
Yeah.
And then an opportunity presented itself, and kind of really to answer your question, early 2018, January timeframe, I get a call from a headhunter that representing a firm in New York. That firm was DACC, ultimately acquired by Bakkt. And initially, I thought it was a scam, right? Like,
yeah.
I get this random call from this headhunter, and they're like, "Hey, like, there's this company. I can't really tell you too much about it, but they're looking for somebody with government experience." It was really funny. And like the first call I had with the headhunter, I was like, "Yeah, this dude is completely trying to scam somebody." Come to find out, not a scam. Actually, some really great dudes. And joined that company. I think we were there. We kind of did that for probably 15 months or so, year and a half or so, something around there, when Bakkt swooped in and acquired us.
And then what happened?
Yeah, and then spent the last year at Bakkt. Bakkt's a really interesting company. They're doing a lot of things. There's clearly been
they are the institution for the institutions. Like that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could say that, and I think that's a lot of the kind of general theme of what people think. Majority owned by Intercontinental Exchange. I'm sure everyone knows ICE that listens to your podcast, but for those of you that don't, ICE also owns the New York Stock Exchange, and a dozen other things around the world, exchanges, clearinghouses, etc. Fortune 500, $50+ billion company. That's the company that majority owns Bakkt. So I found, and ICE definitely has a branding issue given some of the DHS ICE.
Oh,
things.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it does.
So when I say ICE, I mean Intercontinental Exchange.
That ICE, not
the putting kids in cages ICE.
Okay, so you, no, continue.
Yeah, so spent a year at Bakkt. I think we were about 50, 60 employees when I got there. 11 of whom were DACC pullovers from the acquisition. And then a year later, I left, and I think the headcount at Bakkt, after a couple other acquisitions, is north of 400. So pretty wild ride for about a year.
So like you're describing all these attributes to like the government employee, and I'm writing them down, and I'm saying to myself, the government employee is actually perfectly conditioned to work in our industry, because you're talking about someone who understands what it's like to be part of a whole, right? Like doing something not just for money, but for the better of the good. At least that's what I think a lot of people in government think about, why they join government or whatever. You're like not saying yes, so I can't tell if you agree with me or not.
Yeah, I would say yes. Okay. There are, yeah.
But whatever. There's also like long-term, like understand that you can work for something like long-term, because a lot of millennials nowadays, like my age people, are like, I'm not even millennial, it's like younger than me, or like, they want to work for companies like 1 month at a time. So like the long-term aspect, because when you're in crypto, it's a long-term game here. And then people who work for low pay with a lot of risk. So how do we attract? So do you agree with that? And then 2, how do we attract more government people to work in our industry?
So I would say generally agree with all of those things. And I would say not just government employees, and certainly there is an archetype there. But I would say government employees that are in one, or better yet, both technology and intelligence. I think there are some amazing skill set crossovers from the intelligence community in crypto. And I guess to answer your question, how do we attract them? I think it's telling the story and putting out good content. This is why we're doing this. This is why we think the future of blockchain and Bitcoin and digital assets more broadly is important.
Narratives and that's important to this
mission.
The mission, the vision, the story arc, the narrative. Although the word narrative is starting to get like a negative term, and I don't, nowadays, but because people assume that narratives can be manipulated, which they can. But the narrative, or the story arc, or the vision. Not the vision. I shouldn't say that, because that implies leadership. The like overarching like story of everyone involved in Bitcoin early on, and then eventually crypto. It used to be like a lot more like it used to be, early on, Bitcoin was like very anti-government. Like when I got involved, this was a like end the Fed anti-government thing. But but over the first year or two, it was understood that not end the Fed, rather transcend, and that's, build out better technology, better solutions, better ideas, and under like the voluntarist understanding of like, don't force someone, rather create good competition, then people will look and say, hey, there's one financial system that sucks, but Bitcoin or crypto is a better one. I'm going to voluntarily switch myself over to use that one. That message has shifted. When you first heard about Bitcoin, do you feel that was the message back then and that has changed? And has it changed enough to attract government employees or to enter industry, or just like the how we are viewed? Are we still viewed from your former colleagues or people that your friends? Are we viewed in this, anarchist light still?
I don't think I'd say the anarchist light. I think there's a healthy dose of skepticism. Something else, great skill set in crypto, great skill set in the intelligence community, is a good dose of healthy skepticism about everything.
I love that. I'm gonna write that down too.
And that's a great skill overlap. If you can thoughtfully question everything, you'll do better in life, my view. But yeah, I wouldn't say that. I've seen resumes from FBI agents, DEA agents. Oddly, I saw a resume not too long ago for a DEA agent that on his resume was somehow implying in general terms involvement in Silk Road, and I was like, oh boy.
I have a crazy story about that. Well, actually, it's not my story, but if you guys listen to a previous podcast of mine, and I'm actually forgetting his name, but he was I can't believe I'm forgetting his name right now, but he was the former, hang on, I'm going to pull it up. It was a great show. He was a guy who actually ran gold, silver, Bitcoin, which was a way for you to go from like Bitcoin into crypto back and forth. And I can't find it. He got an email, Justin O'Connell. That's the episode. Great episode. He got an email from a DEA agent, and on his resume said, hey, I'm a DEA agent. I just took down Silk Road and I want to be your chief compliance officer. And the guy, so Justin hired him, and then the guy ended up using the website to launder the money he stole from Silk Road. This is Karl Mark Force. The guy, yeah, that was him. So you talk about resumes on DEA, it's kind of crazy. That's how it all went down.
Things never surprise me, the stuff people try and get away with.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, to kind of double top the question that you asked, I don't think it's full anarchist. I think there's some skepticism, but I do think as more serious institutions get involved, it helps normalize the concept of digital assets, of Bitcoin, and that can only help the pool, the recruiting side of things can only help expand the pool of people that want to move into the industry.
I completely agree. And I really like what you said about like security, hygiene, and healthy skepticism. And it's so important for our industry and Bitcoin and everything else. On that note, like of like skepticism, what are, in your view, let's talk about Bitcoin specifically for a second. In your view, like what are Bitcoin's, your only strength is as strong as your weakest link? Is that like, that's the quote, right? What's Bitcoin's weakest link from a security perspective?
I mean, that's a good question. I think from a security specific perspective, I think it's there's still reliance, and I've seen articles and read stories of stuff in space, and also it's actually funny. An anecdotal aside of at one point I was spending a lot of time thinking about how to bank legal cannabis, and I know way too much about how that effectively doesn't work.
We have to talk about that because I just had a cannabis doctor, neurologist on my show just the other day.
But there was some investor out in Silicon Valley that was like trying to like explain to me how they wanted to put a bank in space because it was like it wasn't subject to any jurisdictions. But
no, the best solution is CanPay. I found they solved the banking issue.
Well,
in Florida at least.
So there's some thought. Hyper, another really good product. They're based out in Arizona, but yeah, that we should talk about that. But the weakness piece of Bitcoin, I think is there's still a reliance, as long as you're on the planet Earth, on things that the government can control. Those things are electricity, lots of electricity, and those things are transport. So network infrastructure, ISP, something that we called in the, and I don't even know if they still use this term, but at one point we called it dark fiber, basically bulk transport layer fiber connectivity, between continents, across continents. So
these are the cables that go from like one continent to another, those big fiber optic cables?
Those or simply the land-based infrastructure that allows you to go from New York to San Francisco.
But that's the choke point. There's like one building that literally, like, that's the crazy thing that people don't realize about the internet, is that there's like, yeah, we're on a decentralized internet, but when you have data that goes from one country to another, especially smaller countries, there's like a physical location where that data is going through. And if that physical location, that's how they did in Egypt, they shut off the whole internet. So you're fucking scaring me right now, because you have a good point. Bitcoin is very much reliable on global government utilities. You're right, 100%. And that's something how do you solve that?
And well, let's talk about that. But I would say that let's add on to that layer, that fear level, is both of those, internet and power, are considered critical infrastructure. And with that moniker of critical infrastructure comes with it a certain level of government ability to inspect and audit and mandate and order certain activities. So, how do you insulate against that? Like, that's a great question. I haven't found a solution that I think is scalable, secure, that solves all of those problems. I mean, just for me, I joked earlier, and it wasn't even a joke. It's like, I'm actually deadly serious. Like, I'm actually looking, I've spent a lot of time since kind of the early part of March, stayed with a buddy who has got a nice cabin, hot tub, and kind of did a bunch of just like hanging out with kind of our quarantine crew. And then I've, been kind of a little bit running around the country doing different things. But I'm kind of in the market to, hey, I want to buy something myself. I want to buy a piece of land, maybe something with a house on it. I don't know. But in that investigation, I start like nerding out. I'm like, okay, how am I going to get it off grid? What's the power consumption requirements? Solar, water, whatever it ends up being. And it's actually really hard to solve for, call it a 3-bedroom cabin that I want to run a coffee maker and a TV and a couple computers. I don't even want to mine. These are solved problems, but there's a lot of thought that goes into it. So how do you do that at scale for Bitcoin? I don't know.
Going off the grid is very expensive, and it's still very niche. Like, most people can't afford to do it. They have to rely on government utilities, and it's very difficult to change that. So there's like two schools of thought. I had this conversation with actually someone who's probably lives in your state right now. Jameson Lopp, he lives near. You should go chew guns with him. He's like my favorite person.
We should.
No, literally, if you guys go, I'm coming. I'm driving up. Okay. I think I'm spending August near Asheville. I don't know if you're near there, but I'll be around there in North Carolina.
Yeah, maybe we should set that up. We'll have to talk. We'll set that.
Yeah, that would be fun. No, that would be fun. But so reliance on that is important. There's like two schools of thought when it comes to Bitcoin, and that is like, okay, so yes, we know it's a problem, but there's nothing that you're going to ever change. The government has controlled utilities forever, and it's always going to be the way. So let's basically figure out better ways to hide or encrypt the data. I think the quote I read once, that when there was a Bitcoin wallet that had launched, maybe it was a Nix wallet or something, I forget. When they launched, it said, in order to hide the signal, you have to create noise. So that's like kind of the understanding of like basically just create a ton of noise, and eventually the government would have to turn off the internet to turn off Bitcoin. But as we're seeing, governments are actually turning off the internet. So that's not really a good excuse anymore. So the other one is create new utility. How do you create new utilities? Mesh networks? Do you do like Blockstream satellite and put Bitcoin in space?
I ran across a company recently through a random string of events. This happens to me all the time. It's like random question somebody will email me, hey, so-and-so said to hit you up about this. They thought you might have 30 minutes of an opinion on it. So very similar, had a interesting discussion with a company called, I hope they don't mind me saying their name. Actually, it's free advertising, so I doubt they care, and they've got it all over their website. But a company called GoTenant, GOTE.
Oh yeah, I know them super well.
Yeah, so I had an interesting conversation with them, and they're kind of in that mesh network, low low bandwidth.
Yeah, they're big in the
latency.
boating community.
I didn't know that.
Okay. I'm in the boating community, and I have one. They're huge in the boating community. Everyone has one. So I actually talked about this on a show, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't know if you know this, but there is a mesh network in the world today, a huge one that no one knows about, and it's decentralized, and it's uncontrolled, and it's actually very inefficient. But it's the boater community. Theoretically speaking, if I had a message that I wanted to pass from here to Japan, there are enough boats with radio signals in between VHF, UHF, for the signals to bounce off from boat to boat to boat to boat to boat to somewhere else, anywhere in the world. And I've practiced this. I've gotten messages. It's like ham radios, but lower frequency. So ham radios are great because they go all, but I'm talking about just like VHF, UHF, where you don't need a license. You can go buy from the store. So my friends and I did this as for fun, as a test. And we set up at our houses, a small handheld radio antenna every like 5 miles, their maximum thing. And we were able to continue the hop and get these messages down, hop. So we had to repeat the person would have to repeat it every, it's an inefficient mechanism, but you can build out these like systems, these mesh networks, and they exist.
Yeah.
The boating community.
So, I would say, like, if we flip this question on its head, though, right? And I would say, if rather than saying, how do we prevent government from impacting critical infrastructure to degrade, the performance of the network, or potentially somehow disrupt Bitcoin. Maybe the other side of that question, though, is how do we incentivize them not to? How do we actually continue the journey, continue the normalization, continue adding utility to Bitcoin to where the government actually starts to adopt it, and then they start to actually, and big they, whoever that ends up being, they start to see it as something that they're actually incentivized not to impact. And I think that's actually a much more,
it's
a much more straightforward
idea.
path. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There's and it's true, because someone said, what would happen if a government decides to buy up all the Bitcoins and kill it? And so the idea is that there's a financial incentive to not do that. And so but realistically, there is, going back to the question of like what Bitcoin's weakest link, there is enough money today for someone to cause unnecessary narrative havoc on Bitcoin. And that's something that I fear. And obviously now, like, Bitcoin is growing and crypto is growing, our industry is growing, and that narrative is harder to like control and change and do. But that's one of the things that I look at. That's actually not good to answer because that's not a security thing. But yeah, that's, here we are today, almost 10 years into Bitcoin, over 10 years into Bitcoin's existence and crypto in general. It's kind of crazy. So what are you going to be doing on BlockFi?
Think about all the progress that we made just in the last 3 years, right? It's quite jarring when you sit back and look at it. So the question was, what am I going to do at BlockFi? Yeah, we didn't. It's when this gets released, you'll be working. You'll be at your desk. Well, actually, you'll probably be sitting in the same spot. But what are you excited about? What are you going to be working on? You have any focuses that you really want to achieve in the first this Oh yeah, so many things. And like, let's just not ignore the elephant in the room, because I'm sure if this comes out and we don't mention it, there will be somebody who complain about it. But recently BlockFi had a security incident. There was a SIM swap against an employee, and I think unfortunately, I remember that. Yeah, no one wants to. So I look at it like, let's just get it out there. There's been press releases. There's been articles. But here's my thought on it is, no one wants to deal with that. You don't want to be the employee. You don't want to be the company. You don't want to. It's no one wants to deal with any type of cyber incident, any type of security incident. When I say security incident, just for frame of reference, I mean cyber. I mean it could be something beyond cyber, but technical. It could, and then also physical security, right? And not just do we have all of the right badge readers in place, but think of things like, God forbid, something like active shooter, or something along those lines, right? Yeah. Got to think holistically here. So I always say, and somebody who I've known for a long time and used to be the global CIO for a Fortune 10 company, she would say we will have security events. They will happen. But the measure of an effective security program is how quickly you identify, contain, and remove the threat. And if you look at the postmortem that BlockFi in a super transparent way posted, one of the reasons I really like Zach is his level of transparency internally and externally is those three things: identify, contain, and eradicate happened very quickly. And I think that's a measure of maturity of an organization. So, my kind of mission at BlockFi is really going to be to take stock of everything that they're doing on the security front, on the macro security front, and start to really refine what is all of the great work that's already been done, start to really refine and sharpen the pencil on all of that, everything from what I would consider back office to corporate systems, things like email and identity, to product, mobile applications, physical security, and really kind of just level up and make BlockFi, a leader in the security conversation that's happening across the community.
And I think you'll be able to do it because of everything you've done and talked about so far. And now you're right. Like, you're only as strong, going back, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And when something happens, look, I've been simjacked 3 times, twice on my phone number and once on my wife's. The hacker stole my wife's number and texted me from it saying, "I'll give it back to you for 30 Bitcoin." I've been simjacked twice. One of them, the hacker actually hacked into my email, waited until I was on a flight, knew when I was going to be on a plane, and simjacked me while I was on the plane. I know, crazy. The first time was only able to get 1 Bitcoin, and this was many years ago. And then the second time for my wife, nothing. And the third time, it just happened recently. I'm lucky because my really, really good friend is in the process, actually at the time was in the process, but launched his own cell phone carrier. So he launched a carrier against SIM swapping. And if anyone wants to be a tester, they can email me and they can come on. So he launched a company, and I don't want to talk about it yet, but it's $100 a year. And you get to choose the network that you're on. So you get to choose Verizon, AT&T, or Sprint. And it's impossible to port, meaning that once your number is on this network, his network, it's impossible to port. It's a VIP system, and your number is literally secure. How do I know this? Dude, it was the coolest thing. So this is what happened when I got simjacked. It was like 2:00 in the morning, and I woke up to use the restroom, and I got a text from Verizon saying that my number was successfully ported. So that's like the text you don't want to get. Like, I'm freaking out. I immediately take myself off of airplane mode, and I see that I don't have service anymore. The LTE sign is gone. I'm freaking out. So I go on and I try to get in. Verizon is closed, of course, whatever. So I'm in a bunch of chat rooms, and I messaged and I said, I just got simjacked. Guys, like, don't answer any of my emails or anything like that. Friend was up. He was awake. I don't know why he was awake. He messaged me. He goes, "Oh, Charlie, I just got my porting ability." I was like, "What is that?" He goes, "I can port numbers now." I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Watch." He literally in 30 minutes, not even 10 minutes, called my wife from my phone number, got my number back from the hacker, ported it from the hacker. So cool.
That's good. Like, offensive security being used as like a defensive purpose. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of great products that are starting to come out around how to prevent SIM swaps. My view of it is, and something I've done for a long time, is get off of SMS.
Yeah, just get off of SMS.
Get off of SMS-based multi-factor. That is a 101 level thing. And if there's a service that there are still a couple services out there that do not support an authenticator app or YubiKey. Certainly, there's a lot that don't support YubiKey, and it's
even
upsetting
Twitter
to me.
just had it a few months ago. Had the ability to do an authenticator. It was SMS for a while. So yeah, you're right.
And then didn't Jack get SIM ported?
Yeah, SIMjacked or something, or someone did.
Yeah. So, but my thing is, like, what I've done, like, for years and years and years, and I've gotten more sophisticated at it more recently. But for years is, because this was always a concern of mine, was to register a number, and of course there's cost with everything, but register a number, that no one knows the carrier of it. No one knows the number. Like it's a number, not a number you give out to anyone. And the only thing that number is used for are those handful of services that still require SMS multi-factor. So you'd have to, one, know the number, and two, you'd have to know which carrier, which isn't impossible to find out, it is on. And frankly, if you can get a carrier that is digital only, so think of like, your online VoIP providers, basically a carrier that's not one of the main cell carriers, AT&T, Verizon, whatever, then you can set up separate multi-factor around that VoIP provider.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You can do VoIP. Some of them don't allow you to use at like two-factor SMS with voice over IP. So a good trick to that is if you sign up with like a Metro PCS or a Boost Mobile, not one of the main characters. Like I think Metro PCS actually just uses Sprint. So your number will come up as Sprint, but if someone tries to call Sprint to port your number, Sprint will say, we don't have control over this number. So that's another little tidbit too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real risk.
It is. It is a huge risk, but I think at the end of the day,
my word of advice for anyone that's listening is if you're doing anything sensitive, clearly crypto, anything fintech, anything payments, anything PII even, if that app, that service does not support authenticator, minimum, or YubiKey, really question why you're using that service.